In our previous video, we talked about, I basically gave you an intro on what query sets are and how they work in our test. We ran that test and we got this error, wherein it says that we cannot import the item class from the models module. So let's fix that now by creating an item, the item class. But before we do that, we can create our next commit. Okay, so let's git add, and then I will commit it, git commit -m, initial test for creating models, creating the item model. Okay, now let's go back to our test, or to our editor, and let's open our models.py, which is empty right now. Okay, so remember, when doing TDD, you want to do the least amount of code needed. But why, since we already know that we need to do a model, why are we to limit ourselves to creating just an item name? We know it's a class. So let's make it a class. Class item. Okay. So it's just an item. Okay, so that should allow our test to pass. So Python manage.py test. That will create a passing test. No, not a passing test, but it will get us to our next error, which says that we have no save method attribute on the object item. That is because it is just a blank item or a blank class. So let's create the passing code for that. So to make that pass, the only change you have to do is to make sure that it is an instance of the model class or the model's superclass. Okay, so that's inside the models that is already in your models.py. That is default there. So from django.db import models, and then we want to extend the model class from there. So class item extends models.model, and then we can just give it a pass. Okay, so that makes this item class a model. Okay, now we can try and run that again. Now I get a database error. It says here django.db.utils operational error, no such table, lists item. So lists being our app, item being our model. So in dealing with Django, that is how Django creates your tables. The table name is basically your app name underscore your model name. Okay. So right now I won't be using Postgres, which I asked you to install. Let's do that some other time or another video. So for simplicity, let's use the default SQLite that you would have already seen in your folders. Okay, so if you look at your folder, you will see a db.sqlite3. Okay, so that's a text-based database. So you don't need to install anything. That file is your database. Okay. Now that error exists. Okay. That no such table list item exists because you have not yet created a migration, and your database still has not created. That table still has not been created. Okay. It says here no such table. So we need to create our migrations. Okay. So what are database migrations? Database migrations are essentially version control for your database. It contains information about what changes are made to the database with each migration. Essentially, if you change the type of column that it is, or the name of that column, the migration would have that information, so that it will update your database accordingly. And with those migrations, if ever your database goes wrong or something, you have the ability to turn back your database, and all the schema that you have will be automatically migrated, thus the name migration, okay, to that specific version. Okay, so to make a migration, again we use the manage.py command. So Python manage.py make migrations, and I want to make migrations for my lists app. So that will create a migration. It says that I am, or the contents of that is that I created the model item. So let's look at what that migration looks like. Okay, so let's go back to our text editor. Let's go to the migrations table and let's look at that migrations file. Okay, so this is what it looks like. It says initial is true because this is the first one. There are no migrations before it. The dependencies, this lists what database migrations should have happened first before this migration happens, and then what operations happen. So this is that key operations. So this is a list, migration.create model. This could also be migration.update field, modify field, etc. Okay, and then my default fields for this, even though I said that I don't have anything in there, but by virtue of extending the model class, I have an ID. Okay, so my item already has an ID, so that I have an ID field, and that is auto increment. Okay, so modulus.auto field, so that will automatically increment with every creation of my class, every instance that is saved to my database. And that is a primary key. Okay, as shown here, primary key is equal to true. Okay, so let's close that. Let's not have to do anything with that. Let's not change it because we don't need to. Now we have created our migration for our list app. We need to migrate it. Okay, now I could have omitted the lists string in that command and it would still work. That would create a migration for my entire project. So if I had multiple projects, it will create all the migrations for all those projects. Okay. Now to commit this to the database and create actual tables, we again use the manage.py file, manage.py, and then migrate. I'm calling migrate universally so that it applies all the other migrations that are in my application. If you notice my server, it says every time my server restarts, it says you have 13 unapplied migrations. So these are the default migrations that are needed by Django. Okay, so let's migrate everything. Okay, notice that creates a little for authentication for the default admin UI of Django, and then more authentications, some for our sessions. So again, for users who are logged into our authentication app, and then our lists app. Okay, so now if we run our test again, python manage.py test, manage.py test, we should now have an error that says item object, the item object has no attribute text. So what this means is that our table does not have the text attribute, which we already know. Okay, we just had to have the text or the test tell us what we needed to do next. That is the TDD way, right? Okay, so now we need the text attribute or the text field, and then we want it to be a text field. We want it to be freeform. We don't want to limit it to a certain number of characters. Okay, so we make it a text field. In another video, I will show you all the different types of fields that there are in Django, but for now, let's just have this text field, and you already know the other one, the auto field. Okay, so let's create that. Okay, so let's create let's run our test because we already wrote it, right? Now my test says that I have no such column. Okay, this is because we created an addition to our database, but we did not, or to our model, but we did not commit it to the database. So what do we do to create our commits? We first create our migrations. Make migrations. Okay. Now it asks us for something to do. Okay, you are trying to add a non-nullable field text without a default. Okay. So I have two options. The first one is the first option is to provide a one of default. So I can provide, so the idea here is that if there are existing rows in my table, I will have no need to, or they will be appended with that default value. Okay. So migrations assume that data is already in your database. Okay. The second option is we just quit and let's add a default in our models.py. Okay. So let's do that second option. Let's go back to our code. Because it assumes that we might have data in already, we just create a default here. So that will be the default for everything. So, okay. So we are giving the text field a default via a keyword argument. In Python, this is what's called a keyword argument, wherein you're adding arguments to your methods when you're calling them. But those arguments, okay, you give a name to it. So in this case, it's a default keyword argument, the keyword argument default, and that default is basically an empty string. Okay. Now we have created that default. We can now make our migrations again. So I added the text field. Okay, so what does that look like in our migrations? In our migrations, that looks something like this. Okay, so notice how the dependencies here say what migrations need to be done first before this is applied. Okay, so this is useful when you are recreating the database, you're building the database. So from your development machine, you're going to deploy it to some other server. You have to run the migrations, and Django has to know which migrations have to go first. Okay, so that's that. So the dependencies here are the list app's first migration. And then here we have a migrations that add field. Okay, I'm creating another field on the model item, and that field's name is text, and that field's type, okay, is called models.textField. So basically what we wrote. Okay, so let's go back to our code. Now we have that migration file. Let's migrate. And now that we have migrated, we can test it again. Python manage.py test. Python manage.py test. Okay, and we should have everything running smoothly, and then we can commit Python git add. Okay, let's -p. So let's check what git add -p. Let's check what we are adding. We are adding the models. Okay, git status. Let's also add our migrations. So git add lists migrations. Now my modified models.py and my two new files, which are my migration files, are my staging. So let's commit that. Git commit -m create item model. And that is it for this video.